On the 16th of January 2024, a federal judge in Massachusetts permanently halted the proposed merger between JetBlue and Spirit Airlines. The Department of Justice hailed the ruling as a triumph, issuing a statement that framed it as a win for travelers who deserve more affordable fares and expanded choices. Fast forward just over 2 years to the 2nd of May, 2026, Spirit Airlines abruptly ceased operations. 17,000 employees lost their jobs before dawn. Tens of thousands of passengers who had flown with Spirit the previous day woke up to discover the airline vanished, and 9,000 flights scheduled for the remainder of the month were canceled in a single blow. The DOJ maintained it was defending market competition. In reality, the action preserved an environment in which Spirit no longer existed. The history of Spirit Airlines puts this chain of events into perspective. Founded as Charter One in 1983, it spun off from a trucking enterprise and rebranded as Spirit in 1992. For decades, it pursued a straightforward approach: offer the lowest possible ticket prices, maximize ancillary fees, and operate planes painted a distinctive yellow, leaving passengers with no illusions. By 2022, this approach faced intense pressure. Rising operational costs had eroded airline balance sheets nationwide. Jet fuel prices were unpredictable, and Spirit had suffered hundreds of millions in losses. The company urgently needed a lifeline. Frontier Airlines made an initial offer, but JetBlue entered with a higher bid of $3.8 billion. Spirit's board accepted JetBlue's proposal in April of 2022. In March of 2023, the Biden Department of Justice filed a lawsuit to block the merger. Their reasoning was that removing Spirit as an independent carrier would diminish competition on multiple domestic routes and harm low-income travelers who relied on ultra-cheap fares. The DOJ prevailed. In January of 2024, District Judge William Young permanently enjoined the merger. JetBlue compensated Spirit with $69 million as a termination fee and withdrew from the deal. Spirit's CEO at the time, Ted Christie, publicly stated that partnering with JetBlue represented the company's best opportunity to foster needed competition. In effect, the DOJ had obstructed the very strategy Spirit's own leadership deemed essential to enhancing market competition. By November of 2024, Spirit filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for the first time, having lost over $2.5 billion since 2020. Shareholders were wiped out, and creditors assumed control. The airline emerged from restructuring in early 2025, only to enter bankruptcy again in August of that year. Less than a year had seen 2 bankruptcies. In March of 2026, Spirit successfully negotiated a restructuring plan with its bondholders. According to the CEO's statement during the shutdown announcement, this plan would have allowed the airline to continue operating. The management had envisioned a viable path forward. Then external shocks struck. The war in Iran triggered a sharp escalation in jet fuel costs. A Deutsche Bank forecast predicted the conflict would increase annual U.S. airline fuel expenses by $24 billion. For a carrier already operating on the edge, having eliminated 4,000 positions and cut 200 routes, there was no buffer left to absorb this sudden shock. Spirit required hundreds of millions in emergency funding almost immediately. Desperate, the airline turned to Washington for assistance. The Trump administration entered discussions over a $500 million rescue package. Remarkably, as late as the 1st of May, 2026, the day before Spirit's collapse, President Trump informed the press that his administration had put forward what he called a final proposal. One official described the situation as a tough negotiation, but ultimately it was a simple reality. Either the deal went through or it did not. In this case, it fell apart because key bondholders refused to agree to the proposed terms. Among those who declined support, according to U.S. sources speaking to CBS News, were Ken Griffin's Citadel and Ares Management Corporation, 2 of the most sophisticated institutional investors globally. They examined the conditions of the government-backed lifeline and decided against it. By rejecting the proposal, they effectively sealed the airline's fate. One creditor, speaking on background, remarked, "You can't breathe life into a corpse." Most Spirit employees discovered the loss of their jobs through news outlets rather than through official notices or severance communications. Around 1 a.m. Eastern, the union representing approximately 5,000 flight attendants received confirmation. By sunrise, ticket counters were abandoned. To understand the scale, Spirit Airlines carried roughly 1.7 million domestic passengers monthly and maintained a 3.9% share of the U.S. market in early May 2026. 9,000 flights were on the schedule through the end of that month. Every single one was canceled in a single Saturday morning press release. Out of the 113 nonstop routes Spirit operated at the time of its closure, only about 15 were exclusive to the airline. This means most routes remain served by other carriers. But competition has shrunk dramatically compared to just 48 hours earlier. According to travel research firm Going.com, fares along Spirit's former routes could surge by 15% or more. Popular leisure destinations such as Orlando, Las Vegas, and Fort Lauderdale will experience the most immediate price increases. Spirit had made these destinations financially reachable for travelers who could not afford standard legacy carrier rates. Now, these passengers face fewer choices and higher ticket costs. Some routes have lost nonstop service entirely. Fort Lauderdale to Lemoore, Peru, Fort Lauderdale to San Antonio, and Fort Lauderdale to St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands are all gone. Travelers who purchase tickets directly with credit or debit cards through Spirit will receive automatic refunds. Those who use loyalty points, vouchers, or store credits must now navigate the bankruptcy process to seek repayment. Travel attorney Henry Hartfelt told CNBC that, in his view, the likelihood of recovering funds for these passengers is slim to none. The human toll is staggering. 17,000 direct jobs at Spirit vanished, alongside thousands more in contracting, ground operations, and airport services that depended on Spirit's operations. Unions representing pilots, flight attendants, and mechanics are now demanding that Spirit's management and the federal government ensure employees receive owed compensation and benefits. Whether this happens will be determined through the bankruptcy proceedings, a process known for its slow pace. Transportation Secretary Shaw Duffy held a press conference Saturday at Newark Airport. He placed the blame squarely on the Biden Department of Justice. According to him, a merger had been proposed between JetBlue and Spirit, but Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and the DOJ decided to block it. At the time, the Biden administration celebrated halting the merger as a victory for American travelers. Secretary Duffy argued that by preventing the JetBlue-Spirit merger in 2024, they turned their backs on both the U.S. consumer and the nation's aviation workforce. While debate over the DOJ's antitrust rationale continues, the consequences are undeniable. Spirit Airlines is gone, leaving passengers and workers in a precarious void. Economists can reasonably debate whether stopping the merger ultimately helped or harmed consumer welfare. What cannot be disputed, however, is the sequence of events. The DOJ blocked the JetBlue-Spirit deal in January of 2024. 10 months later, Spirit filed for its first bankruptcy. 9 months after that, a second bankruptcy followed. 16 months after the merger was permanently blocked, Spirit Airlines ceased to exist. The Department of Justice claimed it was defending competition, yet the airline it supposedly protected vanished entirely. Anyone paying attention to these systems could already suspect that official decisions, framed as victories in press releases, often land harshly on ordinary people. Spirit's shutdown only made that reality undeniable. Here is a concrete, documented instance. A federal agency intervened in a private transaction, assured the public it was safeguarding their interests, and the very individuals it claimed to protect ended up with fewer flights, increased fares, and 17,000 neighbors out of work. That does not suggest the merger would have been flawless. It also does not absolve JetBlue from responsibility. Multiple factors contributed: the Iran conflict, soaring fuel expenses, years of accumulated losses, and choices made by Spirit's own executives. The situation is complex, but complexity does not absolve accountability. The DOJ issued a press release declaring victory. For those seeking to track the gap between institutional statements and actual outcomes, this is exactly the type of story the What Changes community investigates. Members support deeper analysis of these events without diluting the truth. The question that seems to go unanswered in Washington is straightforward. If the DOJ's mission is to protect consumers, especially low-income travelers who rely on budget airlines, what mechanism exists to hold them accountable when their intervention accelerates the disappearance of the very carrier they aim to protect? Who drafts the follow-up statement? Who steps to the podium in January of 2026 and admits, "We made a choice, and here is what it cost"? The answer is simple: nobody. The press releases continue, the conferences occur, careers carry on, and the public ends up paying legacy carrier prices for routes Spirit once flew. This episode is part of a broader narrative. Over the last 2 decades, U.S. airlines have been consolidating, leaving 4 major carriers controlling nearly the entire domestic market. Spirit represented one of the last meaningful ultra-low-cost operators at scale. Frontier remains, Allegiant remains, but they face the same pressures that crushed Spirit: fuel costs, labor expenses, a post-COVID consumer appetite for frills, and a regulatory environment that blocks consolidation but cannot prevent liquidation. What happens next to Frontier? What becomes of the markets where budget carriers remain the sole competitors keeping legacy fares in check? Power in the system does not lie in the boardroom or the press conference. It resides with institutional creditors, the funds that hold debt for struggling American companies. They decide, often behind closed doors, the fate of thousands of employees. When Ken Griffin's Citadel declined the rescue offer, Spirit died. These bondholder meetings, untelevised and largely unseen, are where real decisions are made. Understanding how these creditors exert control over restructurings is essential. They are the true arbiters of whether 17,000 people keep their jobs or lose them overnight. The implications extend far beyond Spirit, revealing the hidden mechanisms shaping America's corporate landscape.